does give us a greater range, greater ability to reach students. It allows you to talk to our class.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, I see we do have a number of students already here. So, and we had just started talking the kinds of questions I was going to ask, and I know the students came prepared. So we might as well start officially. We are recording that, is that okay? And then it will be up on the class website.
Sure.
Okay, so we really welcome back everybody. And if you can put your camera on, please do so we can see you, but we're really delighted to have with us Dr. Anton Treuer, who's one of the leading scholars on Native American history. He received his undergraduate degree from Princeton and then his graduate degrees from the University of Minnesota. And he's an historian. And he has written, by the last count I have, 19 books, including the one we have just read, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask. And he is a really internationally known scholar and speaker. And it's really a great honor for us to be able to have him with us tonight to talk to us and answer the questions which you have prepared. So welcome, Professor Treuer.
Thanks so much for having me. Nice to meet everybody. Welcome to Zoom Life. I don't have a big presentation to give you all. I'm mainly interested in engaging with your questions, and they can be directly in the lane with what you're studying in class right now, or, you know, wide ranging. So if there's something I don't know, I will just say, I don't know. And if it's a matter of perspective, I'll be happy to share mine, and we'll just see where we go. Did you want me to give a little, maybe just a little bit of background about me and some of my own experiences, just to kind of set the stage?
That would be great.
Sure. I could even pull up a little PowerPoint or something.
Oh, good. I can allow you to, yeah, there you are.
You guys seeing me? All right. Yeah. I'll kind of put it in presenter view because it'll enable me to flip around as we hit questions from people. I think, you know, ultimately nobody sees the world the way that it is. Mm-hmm. We all see the world the way we are, and we're all different. And maybe just a little bit about my background and experiences besides the academic things. Koe ani maji tayani we Ojibwe majines mi etago windamunugug awian wagosh indigu minua migizi and dodem anyway be showado shkonigan wen jabayan nibi tamagean Bemidji gamag. I'm happy to see you guys. Give you a little brief introduction in my Ojibwe language. Among the hats I wear, I'm a professor of Ojibwe here, and it's one of a number of indigenous languages that are still alive. We at the time of contact with Europeans, there were some hundreds of indigenous languages in what's now the US and Canada, and probably 500 or so in the US and Canada, and quite a few more in Central America and many more in South America. Today in the US and Canada, there are about only 150 of those still spoken, and about 20 of those are still spoken by children. And of those, you know, some like maybe Hopi or Havasupai, some of the Pueblo languages, you know, even Mohawk, I think they're still pretty threatened, depending on what happens with them now, even though there are children who speak. Ojibwe will probably be here because we got quite a few speakers in Canada, including in some remote communities that where everybody's a speaker. But I think anybody who's not concerned about language and culture loss and the loss of access to the unique worldviews embedded in those languages really isn't paying a lot of attention. So I introduced myself in Ojibwe. I was saying, you know, my native name is Wagush, which means fox. I'm from the Eagle clan, and I'm from Leech Lake. And for those of you who don't know, Leech Lake is right there in the middle of northern Minnesota. It's the epicenter of the universe, even though not everybody knows that. And then I'm just happy and excited to see you all. I had one time, this is Tom Stillday, and he passed away a few years ago, but he was from Red Lake, the next res over from me. And I brought him in as a graduation banquet speaker one year. I said, let's just get somebody who has a PhD in the School of Life and can speak to a real and relatable experience for our students. And this guy's a fluent speaker. He was the first person named chaplain for the Minnesota State Senate who is not from a Judeo-Christian background. So this picture is actually him opening up the state Senate with his pipe. He had a great sense of humor too. He said, I'm praying for politicians. Boy, do they need it. And I couldn't help but to think, man, more than ever right now. But he was fun. We had him in for his banquet speech. I said, whatever you do, you keep it short, focus on the students. And I think he went off for about an hour and a half. And then he said one thing in English, which was, all you people who study Indian, study that. And he went and sat down. So I thought he was fun. But he was also making some good points. Most of the books written about Native people are not written by Native people. A lot of the authors haven't even talked to a Native person. And what they use for sources is what the white Army officer wrote in his letter and what the Army chaplain wrote in his journal. And none of those have Native perspectives. So it's pretty hard. Like, no one would dare write a book on German history without speaking to some Germans and speaking German and doing archival research in Germany. But somehow we've created a different set of credentials for what it takes to be an expert on everything Native. Did you, with this class, take a look at any of the YouTube videos or anything like that I had out there?
I don't want to speak for everyone, but I sent them the video, the documentary on your revival of the revival of the language.
So some of them may have a little background on some of the language work through that. Mm-hmm. All right, and then that just kind of helps me know how to tailor remarks, mm-hmm. Get us started. I think all human beings have ancestors, but I think for Native people, the connection to ancestors and to place is different. It's kind of in the defining features of what it means to be Indigenous. Like, all of us are Indigenous to somewhere, right? It's just that many human beings have become disconnected from mother land, mother language, mother culture. Some people kind of lament what's missing. Some feel okay about it, but I think for Native people, it just plays a little differently. I know for me it does. Like on your image here on the left is a guy named, ironically, John Smith. He was no connection to the one from Pocahontas legend, but he was born in Minnesota in the 1700s, before there was any white settlement, and he died in Minnesota in the 1900s when they're sending people off to World War I. It's kind of amazing to think about the changes he must have seen in his lifetime. One of the really important mentors for me in my life is a guy named Archie Mosé, and he was born in 1901. He was pretty old when I started really working with him. He was already, in his late 80s, and he was 35 the first time he saw a black man or a car. He was a teenager the first time he'd seen a white man. And when I saw him, he was watching like WWF SmackDown on a TV in a modern house. And so things can change pretty quickly. And it's not just technological change and the kind of things we see in our everyday lives, but in a cultural sense too. And I think there's always a tension for every culture about cultural continuity on the one hand and cultural change on the other. In fact, I probably have never met an elder from any group who doesn't shake his or her head and go, oh, kids these days, because of that tension about cultural change. And at the same time, I've never seen a young person who doesn't say, we want things to get better, right? So it's both. On the other side of your screen is this guy named Wabujig. He was white fisher. He's kind of a famous warrior in the Ojibwe world. And I don't think I had the tools to talk about this when I was going to school, K-12, but it bothered me more and more as I got older that I could go to school for 13 years in a row just to finish high school and supposedly learn whatever I needed to be successful in the world. And none of it had anything to do with me. was kind of like the message from the educators who meant well and had good hearts, was that you and yours just aren't important, aren't relevant, don't matter. What was screaming at me was not some mean racist comment so much as the absent narratives. And I think we could say the same about any marginalized group in America. Certainly this is a common thread in the Black, Latinx, Asian American experience too. Invisibility, marginalization on the one hand, and also sometimes hypervisibility for distinct racial minority groups. Sometimes you get racially profiled because you look so different, and sometimes you're so dang invisible, you're even invisible to yourself because it's not in the curriculum anywhere. Both things are happening at the same time. So a little bit about me, and then we'll jump into your questions. My father was not Native at all. He's on your screen here. He was actually an Austrian Jewish immigrant, a Holocaust survivor, spoke nothing but German the first 13 years of his life. He has an amazing story, kind of feels like several lives that he lived. I'll give you the short version for today, which is that eventually he made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. My mom grew up in this little village called Bena, population 400 in the middle of the Leech Lake Reservation. And for her, I think harvesting wild rice and hunting and fishing was not so much a cool cultural pastime and more a necessary means of survival. All kids had to produce food. Looking for economic data on Bena, and it's still pretty sobering to see just how disparate our economic advantages and disadvantages are allocated and how predictable they are based on race. When my folks were getting started, I guess you could say that my mom was trying to find a pathway out of poverty. My dad was hitting the restart button in his life. And there were some humble beginnings. So even for me in my lifetime, I'm 50 now, I saw some big changes. You know, when I was a kid, we had an outhouse, we had a little hand pump, no running water, kerosene lantern, no electricity, you know, getting started. And then by the time I hit middle school, my mother had become the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota, built a nice house. The economic profile for our family changed. And I think to me, it revealed the power of an education. But I'm kind of with George Carlin on this one, that, you know, we call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. There are barriers out there, and the barriers are not equitably distributed based on gender, race, and a whole host of other things. We all get a hand of cards to play, and in the game of life, and some people get better cards. I still tell my kids, you play your cards the best way you can, but if all I tell them is to play their cards the best way that they can, in a way, I'm telling them, as you go out to navigate the highly oppressive systems around us, go be a good oppressor. It's not enough to play your cards the best way you can. You also have to work to change the rules to the game, to make it less oppressive, to make it more equitable, to create greater access to opportunity for everybody. I got a big crew. I have 9 kids. It's never dull. Any of you who like kids, let me know and I'll send you a couple. I know just the ones I'll send you. Yeah, my wife's in the middle of the pile there. She's actually from the Swedish American tribe, meaning blonde hair, blue eyes, 5th generation Swedish American. She's one of the only white people I know who knows what it's like not to see another white person for some weeks on end. We spend a lot of our time at ceremonies, Ojibwe ceremonies and things like that. And so she has a pretty interesting perspective too. Yeah, there's the look off the front deck of my house. I kind of feel like Shrek. That's my swamp. But among the other things I really think and feel as I look out that door, you know, my dad, when he was kind of just getting started in Minnesota, had put in a bid on a piece of tax forfeited property, got a letter back saying yours is the only bid, but it's not enough to cover the delinquent taxes. Can you find a couple $100 extra, which he borrowed, and got a pretty big piece of land. And at one point it had been a virgin white pine forest, clear cut, turned into farm fields. And when he got the property, he just started planting trees. He planted all of the trees in that picture there. It totally transformed the landscape and the ecosystem. One dude with a child labor force. And I think for me, when I look out the door now, and I think about what you all and all of us together are facing with regards to climate change, historical injustice, a racial reckoning in America that is not going to be comfortable for anyone. And I think a lot of humans think about things like that and think, there's not much I can do about that. I'll try to be a decent human. I'll tell my little humans when I have kids to be decent humans, and I hope it's enough, but it's never enough. All that's necessary for evil to triumph is good people to do nothing or too little. In fact, rich people are going to take their money, put it in trust funds, and figure out how to get it to their kids. Wealth naturally will self-perpetuate, which also means that poverty will naturally self-perpetuate. In fact, all the isms will self-perpetuate. So we need to provide a disruption to the ecosystem. But dealing with problems like that doesn't mean we take this mountain of problems that humans have been, making for millennia and move that whole mountain today. It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can transform everything. And that's what education's about. That's what a courageous conversation about race is about. It's about planting those seeds and helping them nurture, and it can change everything. So even in the student position, it's brave work to be a student. Even though you're scrambling and jumping through hoops and trying to, get your degrees and credentials, you have to humble yourself to say, there's stuff I don't want to know. Can you teach me? And it does take a degree of bravery that I think a lot of other people don't always find. There's more to say about my experience and life ways. Like, I'm an academic dude. I travel the world. I kind of got one foot in the ivory tower, but I kind of got one in a wigwam too. I officiate at our medicine dance ceremonies and traditional Ojibwe funerals, and do a lot of work with Indigenous language revitalization. I think my books are kind of split between, I got several history books and several, Ojibwe language books, and then some that are kind of broad, general reader things. I'll kind of skip the next couple of slides and just jump into everything you wanted to know. But I often use this analogy, like if I hold up my finger and I say, what is that? I could start a fight unless we clarified in what language. Like in the language of body parts, well, that's a finger. But in the language of numbers, well, that's a 1. And in the language of space, up. So who's right? And they're all right. It's a matter of perspective, context, language. And all too often when we want to talk about something that's touchy, like race, all too often somebody's up there saying, this here's a finger, it's not an elbow, it's not a toe, the rest of you people, shh. And someone else is going, that's a 1, not a 2. See, they just don't understand. And we totally miss each other. So to me, the effort to acquire new information is really about pulling in multiple perspectives. And when we can see that as a 1 and a finger and up and all the other many things that it can mean, actually in some cultures, it's like holding up your middle finger. That equips us for understanding things differently. And honestly, even with the enterprise of history, it's all a matter of perspective. Someone's, you can tell, so-and-so killed so-and-so on such and such a day. But when you ask the actually interesting questions like why, then you're going to have a whole variety of perspectives and opinions and views. And history can be interpreted in many different ways. And so it's usually good, and you're stronger, you know, the better able you are to see this from multiple perspectives. And all too often we're in an echo chamber with our social media and our chosen news sources, but we're like that in terms of the way education is sculpted and curriculum K-12, you know, even in college. And so it's really, really healthy, I think, to get some of those other perspectives. So with this particular book, I kind of stumbled on this by accident. Did you all get a chance to actually do your reading? You don't have to lie to me. I'm not handing out the grades in this class. But yeah, I kind of stumbled onto it. You know, I naively thought, you know, finishing high school, that I could like escape the brambled racial borderland of my youth and, you know, get away. And when I got to Princeton, I thought, oh, these guys will be far better educated. They won't be so ignorant. It's going to, you know, it's going to be awesome. And right away, the same question started again, you know, where's your tomahawk? Boy, you have beautiful red skin. I'm like, kind of brown, you know, like, I don't know. And so I just thought, these are the dumbest smart people I ever met. And it just started all over again. And then, you know, at one point, I kind of had an epiphany. This is kind of a crazy story, but I had an epiphany when I was getting homesick, and I heard there was this like Comanche spiritual leader coming to run sweat lodge ceremonies out in the New Jersey woods. And I was kind of naive, but I, you know, just smart enough to know the Comanche come from Oklahoma and Texas, and this is New Jersey, and what's somebody doing out here running ceremonies? And there are Fruit Loops and weirdos in the world, and this could be one of them, charlatans, you know. But I went anyways. It was probably about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. The sun was up. It was a nice day. And there were about 20 white people waiting for this sweat lodge ceremony, and they were all completely naked. And I remember looking at those people thinking, holy crap, you know, like part of me wanted to laugh because what can you do? There's 20 naked people standing around in the woods, you know. Part of me wanted to run because, dang, there's 20 naked people standing around in the woods. And part of me was really mad, like, dang, you know, is that what they think we're all about? So being naive, I open the car door and I get out, and one of these naked strangers comes running over and gives me a big hug and says, I'm so sorry about what my people did to your people. So now it's like, awkward. You know, now the desire to like laugh, run, get mad, it's just growing. And I looked at this woman's face. She was an elder, and there's like tears welling up in her eyes. And it occurred to me that no matter how misguided she was, yes, she was misguided, that her emotional response was real. And that if I just walked away, she'd just keep on thinking what she's thinking. If I got mad and told her off, probably like the only native person she ever met was like an angry Indian, you know? And this is something that does happen to people from minority groups that doesn't always happen to white folk, which is like you get asked to represent the whole entire group of people. Like if I ask a white person, what do white people think about this? Like, what do you mean? I don't know. I was like, well, how should I know what natives think about it? I got a house full of Indians. I don't even know what they're thinking most of the time. You know, but that is something that happens. And so I looked at her and I said, ma'am, could you put some clothes on? Because I would love to talk to you about all of this. And she did. And we actually had a good conversation. And I think she arrived at a different perspective. And, but so did I, in the sense that I realized the power of making some safe space where anybody can ask a question. Trying to give a meaningful answer instead of just an angry rebuke, and strive to pull in, you know, those multiple perspectives. And so I started saving questions, you know, and some of the same ones kept coming up, terminology questions. What is tribal sovereignty? How does that work? A lot of people want to know about hot button current events things, you know, the DAPL, Dakota Access Pipeline protests, mascots, you know, any number of different things. People are also really want to know more about indigenous cultures beyond a surface level thing or a picture of a powwow. And so I was just saving questions and started trying to hunt for answers if I didn't have them, and then kind of shared them in this book. So I'll give you that much to get us started. You are free to ask questions about whatever you want, historical ones, cultural ones, political ones, current events, whatever you want, and I will be happy to share my view with the understanding that I really only represent the view of one person, and it's not all Native people, and that there's a lot of diversity of opinion and historical experience, cultural experience within the Native community, and we can jump in. Who wants to get us started? We're pretty small. You might as well just shout them out, and if you're talking over each other, you can drop them in the chat window.
I had a question about like culture now.
Yeah.
You said you were involved in a lot of like I don't know what to call it, but like things that you do, I guess, in Minnesota. How much of that is still, or how much of that is like what they used to practice?
Yeah. So it's a good question, Andrew. First of all cultures change over time, right? Like 12,000 years ago, there's nobody living in England because it was all covered in ice, you know? And then 8,000 years ago, dudes are painting their face blue and worshiping at Stonehenge. And today, people living in England don't even know how they really worshiped at Stonehenge. Same bloodline, right? But radically different cultural shifts. And in fact, I don't know if you ever try to read Geoffrey Chaucer. He was one of the first dudes who ever wrote something down in English. Man, I can barely read that stuff, and my English is great. You know, he only wrote 600 years ago. So just 600 years of language and culture change is incredible. So one of the things to say is that Native cultures change over time too. And cultural change isn't necessarily bad or less authentic. And we kind of have some programming, you know, like I think 87% of the K-12 school districts in America only teach about Native anything before 1900. There's nothing about after 1900. And so we get this beads and feathers view of like, that's authentically Native. And if you don't look like you stepped off the set from Dances with Wolves, it's not as real. Now, having said that, at the same time, there are many cultural customs, practices, and so forth that I think would be very recognizable to our ancestors pre-contact. And there are a lot of different ways to, you know, to approach this. So for me, like one of the things is language. And if you watch the video, it kind of gives you a sense for both the continuity and the change in the language universe. Like, you know, we're teaching things in schools, not just, you know, sitting around a campfire kind of stuff. But at the same time, you know, like, I don't know, here's a picture just sitting in my office, you know, my son and I getting ready for powwow. Right. And so I got long hair, man bunned out today. Right. And the kids. And so it makes a difference what clothes we're wearing. Powwow traditions, I think, are pretty vibrant, and they'll be here 100 years from now, no doubt. But other more ancient traditions are too. So maybe I could give you a really long answer to this, but I'll just give you an example to kind of give you a better sense for how some things may be the same and also change. So one of the ceremonies we do with my family, like when we do this for both boys and girls, we do a lot of hunting. And so when somebody gets their first kill, they kill their first deer, we'll have a gathering, you know, grandmas, aunties, uncles, cousins, you know, namesakes, things like that. And there'll be a prayer. It's all done in Ojibwe. And then the successful hunter, usually they're a teeny bopper or something, you know, they're like, you know, 11, 12 years old or something. And one of the parents or guardians or providers for the kid will take a spoon of the food and they'll offer it to him and say their native name. So they'll say, you know, if their name is Benesi, meaning Thunderbird, they'll say Benesi. And Benesi then would have to refuse the first bite and say, no, I'm thinking about children who don't have enough to eat. Ah, okay, so put it back, take another spoonful. Benesi, no, I'm thinking about my elders who can't get out in the woods to hunt for themselves. Ah, okay, we'll put it back. Benesi, no, I'm thinking of my family, my community, people who came here today to support me. Ah, okay, take another spoonful. Benesi, then they can eat. And then we'll say, Benesi, you just changed your life. Because up until today, you're what we call a dependent, meaning you depended on all the people in this room to provide all your food. And there they are, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. But today now, you're providing for all of us. That's what it means to be an adult. From today on, you're going to have a special power. And it's the power to gather resources. You'll have it when you hunt. You'll have it when you fish, when you pick wild rice or blueberries. You'll have it when you get a job. So use your power and think of children who don't have enough, elders who can't get it for themselves, your family, your community. And then they take the rest of their kill, like packaged up deer meat, and they give it away. So they're impoverished, but rich. And in some ways, like you can see cultural change. Like we might be sitting around at that ceremony wearing pants and a shirt in a house with a forced air furnace, you know, and so forth. And we might have even gone hunting with a rifle. But you can also see the cultural continuity in the concepts and values. And that ceremony would have been conducted in that same language with those same teachings, you know, even some hundreds of years ago. And so I think that's kind of an example of kind of the cultural change and continuity. Other things we do, like I've never been baptized, none of my kids have. We follow traditional Ojibwe religious beliefs and funeral practices. And there's just a lot to unpack in the cultural toolbox, but there are ceremonies that are different when a baby's born, for a naming ceremony, coming of age ceremonies for girls and boys. They've all been fasting. You know, our ceremonies around death are very different too. So instead of somebody kind of has a captive audience and, you know, scolds them a little bit for not getting to church more often and says how pious this person was, the whole officiating crew actually sits with the family and speaks to the departing soul and gives songs and legends to that departing soul, and then instructions on how to get to the spirit world. And then there are instructions for the family on how to deal with grief. And so it's just different. You know, some things might look, you know, yeah, like, you know, the clothes we're wearing or something like that, depending on the circumstance, right? Like when we're dressed up for powwow, you might see more traditional clothes. And in some tribes, you know, amongst the Pueblo, for example, when they do their sacred dances, you'll actually see pre-Columbus regalia. There won't be anything from that. When we do medicine dance ceremonies in the summer, we build these lodges. And for us, they're kind of dome-shaped lodges with saplings. And none of it is like, it's all pre-contact stuff. So we'll have maple and ironwood. We make our string out of tree bark. You know, we tie medicines, you know, that skirt around the lodge. And so you'll see things that are very, very much like that. I think in former, you know, pre-contact Ojibwe art forms, you know, might have been moose hair embroidery and porcupine quill work. And then once we got European trade beads, and then you had this like boom of like indigenous beadwork, even though the trade item that fueled that came from trade contact with Europeans, there was still a distinctly indigenous art form informed by the ancient practice that kind of morphed as the technologies, you know, became available. So there's a lot more to say about that. It's a good question. What's changed? You know, what's the same? What might it look like? And I guess the other thing to say is by tribe, it really varies a lot. So I think, you know, in the Great Lakes and in the Northern Plains, in the Southwest, you know, you see some pretty vibrant religious and cultural practices, you know, that are very distinctive. And in the Northwest coast, you know, there are a lot of people who hunt, gather, and kind of do those kind of practices. But I would say the sacred and religious societies and the language, the health and vibrancy of the language communities there has been more eroded. And then when you look, you know, in the southeast, you know, a lot of those tribes have been moved to Oklahoma. And those who stayed behind, I mean, they were dealing with colonization for a long time. And so it's a lot more thoroughly eroded. And even Oklahoma is really interesting. Some of the customs and traditions, like amongst the Cherokee, smoke dance, things like that, are pretty vibrant. But most people there are like Baptist or Methodist. And so they might, you know, like go to their traditional dance, and they might go to powwows. But when somebody dies, they're getting a church burial, you know. Not everybody, and not in equal measure, but in some parts of Native America, you know, that's there's a diversity of faith traditions, or even predominantly Christian. I think that's the case in Oklahoma. Yeah. All right. Let's get somebody else in there. Go ahead.
I have a question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
Anna.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm literally driving. I'm in New York right now, but I missed the first part of his lecture. I just wanted to know where you were from, like your family, the ancestor, like or the history.
Okay, we're going to start all over here.
No, I'm sorry. You don't have to.
She's driving, so she can't see the slides.
I'm just teasing. Yeah. So I'm Ojibwe. I'm from northern Minnesota.
Okay.
And yeah, and so I'm from a reservation called Leech Lake. And I work up here. I live in my home community, and I work at Bemidji State University. I teach Ojibwe language, history, and culture up here.
Is that where like your back in your like your history, your family history is from as well? Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, my relatives
Like,
are buried in the same place longer than America's been a country.
Okay. I'm just like really fascinated by it because of like, you know, the history of it, the removal and all that, and the injustice that was done. So I just wanted to know how you feel about that.
How I feel about the historical treatment of Native people?
Like, do you feel like they teach Native American history the right way in schools today?
For the most part, I would say no.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think there are two things. Like most people get a sugar-coated version of Chris Columbus and the first Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's starting to change. Like there are teachers who are, you know, taking a far more progressive approach to the teaching of Christopher Columbus. And, you know, there are many cities and even some states now that are changing, you know, Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And, you know, so I think on a social and on an educational level, we are in the midst of change. But at the same time, I think the prevailing narrative that most people have had is a sugar-coated version of Chris Columbus and the first Thanksgiving and a few scattered pieces of other stuff. And it may depend a bit on where you live. Like Alaska and Montana actually have some Indigenous education for all kind of guidance for teachers. And you know, so there are things happening, but yeah,
I'm from Kansas, so that's where I first learned about everything. So I have to ask, what do you think of Andrew Jackson?
What do I think of Andrew Jackson?
Yes.
Well, I don't know. Every time one of my kids was born, my mom would scream another victory over Andrew Jackson.
Okay, that's awesome. That's all I wanted to know.
Anything. Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Sana.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So my heroes aren't your heroes sometimes, you know, and I think that was one of the things that bothered me a lot when I was going to school, is that no one was learning about mine. I was not allowed to learn about mine. And I had to learn a lot of hero worship about, you know, kind of white father figures for America and stuff like that. And as I developed more perspective and got more information, I just realized how disturbing that could be. Yeah.
Thanks. Let's see, Molly, do you want to ask a question or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, then we'll have Trevor.
I was wondering, so I have kind of like a twofold question. So what has been the most, like, in your opinion, what's the most difficult part of culture or language of Native people to preserve? And then what's the most difficult thing to teach other people about?
Yeah, so when it comes to language and culture preservation and revitalization, what are the challenges? There are quite a few, obstacles out there. Languages are complex, and you can't do a quick lesson. You just have to spend a lot of time at it. And there are parts of Africa where people speak 12 languages because they have exposure to them. And, commonly in Europe, everybody speaks 2 languages at least, and most people speak 3. It's a matter of exposure. And so I think one of the real challenges is just getting the exposure time for learners. And there are a lot of ways you can get it, and we've actually been developing, Ojibwe medium schools, Hawaiian medium schools, where all the instruction's happening in the target language, and that really makes a big difference for getting the airtime up. But often they're still immersing kids whose parents might not speak that target language. And even the amount of time you have in school isn't always enough to push somebody all the way over the edge, to a level of true fluency. And although there may be dedicated pockets of people who really go for it, I think, some of the initial damage done to indigenous language communities happened through residential boarding schools, forced assimilation policies, and these kinds of things. But today we're even seeing like there are remote communities in Canada where everyone's a speaker. And then as soon as they get electricity in, there's a satellite dish and the kids are watching SpongeBob in English and they start talking to each other in English, and it's like, it's quite pervasive. And I mean, it might not look like it to you now, but they're even worried about the future vitality of French language. And that's a colonial language that's spoken in many countries, in multiple continents, and that's just because we're seeing the proliferation of a tiny handful of major languages in the world and the declension of others. We got 7,000 languages spoken on planet Earth right now. Only 100 are taught in colleges and universities. Wow. And even of those, it's not a guaranteed slam dunk. And I think there's a lot at stake for the world, because there are unique worldviews and unique ways of solving problems that are embedded in those languages. So if I had to boil it down, I would say airtime, but there are a lot of, things that reinforce and make difficult getting that, it's hard to get funding. There's a lot of pressure for academic English and mathematics in the curriculum. Any school that wants to get started is going to have to teach state mandated curricula if they want to take money from the state government. It's, even when you have a tribal school, you might have almost entirely white teachers because that's who has credentials. So the systems are built in ways that, continually reinforce and cannibalize indigenous sovereignty or preservation reclamation efforts. I'd say our society is highly materialistic, broader society. And so there's a lot of pressure on people to, pursue those jobs, and it takes people off of and out of Native communities. There are a lot of things that compound, the issues. But there are a lot of things that give me hope too.
Trevor,
Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I don't have this question like perfectly phrased, but and I want to preface it by saying I know next to nothing about Native religions, but could you kind of talk about how how religions varied across nations, and did they observe the same deities? Like the Judeo-Christian sect all thinks the same guy is in power, kind of.
Yeah.
How were they similar? How were they different? How broad were the differences?
Yeah. There really are quite a few differences. And it depends quite a bit on what areas you're looking in. But I could give you a few examples just to give you a sense of it. And I can start with mine because I kind of know the most about that, living and breathing that all the time. But in the Ojibwe worldview, although there's a common creator for all human beings, there's also a belief that there's a power in all things and a spiritual essence in all things, and that even the Creator made and placed other spirits amongst us to watch over us and things like that. So when somebody does a prayer, they might invoke our Creator, Mother Earth, spirit in each of the 4 cardinal directions in the wind, a spirit in the water, and things like that, and invoke or ask all of them to help somebody, if they're praying for someone. So the nature of prayer might be a little different. It varies a bit, because when you go to other areas, like in the Great Lakes, I'd say that's a pretty common practice. When you get down into the Southwest, like I got some really good friends at Cochiti Pueblo, for example, and they talk about spirits around and amongst, but they don't do an invocation quite the same way. And so, they'll kind of speak directly to a Creator when they're doing their ceremonies. And so it varies a little bit where you're at and how things are structured. And so I'm not sure if it's quite accurate to say, like with Ojibwe stuff, that's polytheistic so much as, that there might be, a common Creator, but multiple spirits, and even a spirit in each of us. And so even like the parting words, when you're saying goodbye in Ojibwe, there's no word for goodbye. It's just Gekawabam and Minawa. It's like, I'll see you again, this world or the next. Kind of the cultural belief is like our bodies are like cups, temporary housing for your soul. It's not like we have souls. It's like we are souls, and we have bodies for a little while. We're not humans looking for a spiritual experience. We're spirits having a temporary human experience. And like in a lot of our ways, like if your body's a cup, and when you're born, your spirit goes in your cup. And then for us, like the clan, which is a little different than maybe Scottish clans, O'Hanlon is a family group. For us, it's like a spiritual guide, and they're named after, birds, animals, fish, things like that. But it's like a guardian angel or something like that. When you get a native name, that goes in your cup. When you go through ceremonies, they might fill you up with legends and songs. And it's like when you fill the cup up with good stuff, it kind of pushes the bad stuff out. And so, there's just a different belief about those things. Some things that can make it a little harder to study too are that, for a lot of tribes, there isn't like an institution that governs religions. So like the Catholics all have the Catholic Church, right? And there's a Pope, and they kind of have a rule book. And even in totally different countries, although you might notice some differences, the concept and even the rule book for how you do Mass is going to be much the same, right? But like, I don't know, in the Ojibwe world, for example, if someone has a dream and the dream is about a sweat lodge, and in their dream, the door should open to the south because the sun tracks across the south half of the sky from east to west. And it's a symbol of, warmth and healing and, things like that. Then that's what they'll do. But if their neighbor has a dream that it should open to the east because that's where the sun comes up and new life comes from, well, that's what they'll do. And they might be very tolerant of some sort of variation in that practice. Like, oh, well, their door opens to the east. That's what they do over there. And ours opens to the south. That's what we do over here. So people might be tolerant of some kind of cultural difference within that indigenous cultural frame, but they might be really intolerant of being told what to do. Because if somebody says, you all got to open your door to the east, they'll be like, screw that, screw you. Don't tell me how I'm to do my ways. You're not the boss of me. And in former times, they would just like pack up their bags and move down the river and start a new village. He's not our chief, After you hit the reservation period, you couldn't do that. And it forced accommodations. Like sometimes you'd have chiefs from many different villages in the same place. And out in the Northwest coast, sometimes they confederated 12 different tribes on one reservation. So it made it very difficult to navigate some of those cultural things. Where on the one hand, I would say in a lot of indigenous communities, quite a bit of tolerance for the difference, but less so for being controlled around that. And then on top of that, you have like the colonial experience with, being controlled politically, economically, culturally. and people resist those things too.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else have a question?
Go ahead, Patrick.
So I'm curious. You mentioned how in Ojibwe there is no word for goodbye.
Yeah.
I've heard, this is about language, I've heard in a lot of different languages when someone needs to say something but they don't have a word for it, a lot of times they won't just say something different in their language that's close to it. They'll use the word in English or some other language they know that
Yeah.
directly means that thing. Do you think that's at all like a problem?
Oh, it depends on who you're talking to. You know, I was just looking to see if I got some language slides here for you, buried a little deeper in here. Yeah, you know, it's really, really interesting. But the smallest meaningful parts of words denote and carry a lot of meaning. And so, you know, for example, in the Ojibwe worldview, one of the things that's different about Ojibwe from a lot of languages is that the roots of words might be known to everyday speakers. Like in English, you know, for example, the word sarcasm comes from Latin, right? And it has roots in Latin. Sarc means flesh, chasm means to tear. So when you say sarcasm, it means to tear the flesh, which is obviously a metaphor for, you know, being sarcastic or whatever, right? Sarcasm means to tear the flesh, right? And so when you know that, it actually gives a little more meaning to the word. But one of the things I find kind of cool with my language is that oftentimes the roots of words are known to everyday speakers. So when you're telling a story, it's kind of like you're painting a picture. And then directly to your question, when you have new technologies, new cultural concepts, making new words is a little bit easier than it is in a lot of other languages. So, you know, there are a lot of what they call cognates, words that transfer from one language to the other. And by the way, English gives out a lot of cognates to other languages, right? Like even the Japanese word for taxi comes from the English word taxi, right? But it also absorbs a lot of cognates from other languages. Like there are at least 20 Ojibwe words in English: totem, muskeg, toboggan, you know, and stuff like that. And so, so it's a different kind of linguistic practice. Does that make English less authentically English, that they pull in all these words from other languages, that you got to know some Greek and some Latin and some German and probably some whole bunch of indigenous languages to understand all the vocab, or not? You know, I think it's less an issue of is it a problem or not, as much as it speaks to the cultural experience of that particular group and its linguistic origins. One of the things, like just to give you an example, in Ojibwe, we have all these new technologies too, right? Like in English, you had to make up words that might scare somebody from 30 years ago, like firewall and motherboard, you know? But for us, like, you know, someone saw a TV and they say, oh, mazanate sijigan, you know, which is a box that reflects an image through light. And so they just kind of described what they saw. Or, you know, even pants were kind of new. Like everyone had either a dress or breechcloth and leggings. And here come these strange people, and we called them gibudie guazinug. It's something that sews up the hind end. And they must have thought pants were ridiculous, because when it's cold out there and you're wearing pants, you got to take the whole works down just to go to the bathroom. And then if you're wearing a breechcloth and leggings, then whoop, whoop, and you're done, right? So we call them that which sews up the hind end, and it gets you a little chuckle. But here I am wearing pants, you know, and we've adopted to that cultural thing, even though the language might say that. But the other things that are cool about the morphemes are that they speak to the deeper meanings behind cultural concepts, as well as humorous things. And so you can tease people so hard, you know, you can describe in vivid detail, and you can also convey, you know, deeply nuanced meanings and things like that in ways that are really quite beautiful.
What did you say the word was that you say instead of goodbye, because there's no word for goodbye?
Yeah, Gikawabaman. Here, I'll pull up chat
What
Yeah.
does it mean again?
Yeah, it just means I'll see you again.
Okay. I
Yeah.
know that, I don't know if it's true for like that language, but I feel like a lot of people say like they don't like to say goodbye because that means you won't see someone again. So do you think like that's why there's no word for it?
I think it's just a way of saying like, you know, if I bumped into you and maybe we're parting ways and I might never see you again, I'm like, Savannah Gikawabamin, I'll see you again, this world or the next. It's a way of affirming like, you know, you're an ever living spirit, as am I. You know, I see you, I respect you, I appreciate you. And so it just kind of packs meaning like that. There are kind of like these little taboos, like, you know, and this happens even in Ojibwe culture too, where, you know, they'll tell people, you know, kids, don't go sit in that wheelchair over there. It's like you're inviting bad karma for that to happen to you, you know, and you know, don't fake cry, or maybe you'll get a reason to cry for real and stuff like that, you know. And so around death too, there might be little sayings or, you know, coaching about stuff like that. More questions?
Did you grow up speaking Ojibwe?
Yes and no. You know, I did hear the language a lot as a kid, and my mom hauled me around to ceremonies and stuff, but I don't think I was really fluent until much later. Even after college, I came back and I lived with this elder named Archie Mose, who was a monolingual Ojibwe speaker. And so I think that was really when I had a true immersion experience that pushed me over to the top and had me, you know, conversant and dreaming in the language and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I probably took for granted whatever I knew from when I was a kid. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go on, Savannah. No, go on.
Do you teach your son it?
Yes, I have 9 kids and I'm working on all of them. My oldest daughter is actually, she's a great speaker, and she's part of a team where she does transcription work with fluent speakers, and, you know, she's part of our language development projects and stuff like that. And, you know, in some ways I feel like the older kids got a little bit more from me, because I was, you know, at home more and focused on that. And as my career took off and I kind of pulled my attention in other ways, then, you know, I had less or made less time, you know, as time went on with some of the younger kids. So they're still very hungry for it. And there's still time to keep building them up. And we do, you know, like when we finish supper, then you know, the kids will say, and they're required to say before they get up from the table, they have to say, "Miigwech, minopogwad, nda bagadinuguna." You know, they'll say, "Oh, this is good, delicious. Can I please be excused? Can I go watch TV now?" You know, so they'll do that sort of stuff. Yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Does your wife also speak Ojibwe?
She's working on it. I'd call that work in progress.
Okay. Now, your brother is also an historian. I'm just kind of curious if there is any sibling rivalry between the two of you, or if you're well-adjusted.
Oh, I'm far
supportive.
smarter and more accomplished, and he knows there's no rivalry at all.
Good.
Yeah, we agree.
Good.
Yeah. No, it's a big world. There's plenty of room for both of us. Yeah.
I have a question going off of what you were talking about before. Like, what are the kind of ways that Native American children can get involved in learning about their culture without having to learn everything just from their parents and their family?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there are a lot of ways. And I think it's important that we try to amplify opportunity. By the way, not everyone knows this, but even half of the enrolled tribal citizens live off reservation. And the self-identified Native populations, over 70% live outside of Native communities or in urban areas. There are a lot of reasons for that. And even if you grow up on the res, that doesn't mean you grow up doing all kinds of cultural activities. You know, kids are going to the same kind of schools you are, even if they're going to school on a res. And, you know, it's not like there's an army of people just showing them the ways. So for a lot of people, you know, accessing their own culture is a challenge. At the same time, it's, you know, these things are still there. So I coach a lot of people and help a lot of people in their own, you know, personal journeys. And I usually tell people, like, within our cultural toolbox, the good places to start, you know, are developing and establishing relationships. And, you know, something like a powwow maybe is easy access. You can go, but you can also be really passive and just like see beads and feathers and hear some music and eat a fry bread taco and go home and like feel like, I'm not sure how much I got out of that, you know? And so getting connected to people who know is probably the biggest thing. And once you're there, you know, then the steps would be like, you know, find out what your clan is. You know, are you Bear Clan? That tells you something about yourself. And then, you know, do you have a native name? And then let's hook you up with somebody who does naming ceremonies. You can get your native name. And that's also a foundational piece of identity. And then, you know, from there, do you want to learn more? Let's go to some drum ceremonies, not just powwows, you know, and let's check out some other things that are happening in the cultural toolbox. And let's get you out harvesting wild rice, and you can learn all about that. You know, even the way we harvest a deer is totally different from the way someone else might harvest a deer. Like, you know, the slain deer, we speak to them, we make a tobacco offering. There are certain parts of the animal that are put out as an offering. You know, there's a whole bunch of the way we dress it out and use it. It's just very different. So you definitely have the sense you're not hunting for Facebook pictures, you're hunting for food, and it's a cultural process to that. And so there are ways to kind of keep peeling back the layers and growing. And I think, you know, when it comes to things like language and culture, you can't get all the food you need in one sitting. You know, you got to eat a bit, digest, grow stronger, come back, eat some more, keep exercising, keep leaning in. And you may have to generate some of your own luck and your own connection when you're just getting started. But I usually encourage people to reach out to people from their home community if you know what that is. And a lot of people don't. You know, a third of us have been adopted and fostered out of our communities and families and don't even have those kinds of connections. But once you know, but if you do have that, then, you know, find out what's going on, how to connect. And usually calling like the tribal government is not going to get you the right answer or response, because they're busy running businesses and, you know, they don't deal with that. But, you know, there are cultural activities and programs and language camps and culture camps and, you know, things like that. And there's a tribal historic preservation office, and they usually have everything from speakers, you know, and cultural events and things like that. And some of the deeper cultural stuff might not be advertised, but there are a lot of ways that once you start building the connections to kind of take it deeper and deeper. Any others, you guys? Don't be Indianish. There's a whole bunch of areas we haven't even touched yet.
I have a question that I'm going to advertise as a quick question, but I don't think it's quick. How do we as people know when we cross a line between like cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation? Because I think there's a great want to, you know, learn more about histories and cultures that we don't know about, but how do we do that in like a safe, non-offensive, appreciative way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there is a line there somewhere, and it's not always easy to see. So what I usually tell people, it's like, we're like fish. We can see everything in our environment perfectly, except for the glass bowl that confines us. And here we are swimming along and bonk, you know, we hit the glass. How come that person's mad at me? I'm just really good-hearted asking good questions, right? And the way to see stuff that we can't see, because we all have blind spots, you know, we have them around, you know, race, gender, sexual orientation, you know, language, culture, like all these different fault lines in the human experience. So the way to navigate those is some sonar. And sonar is sound waves going out and sound waves going back. So if you're in conversation with people, you know, through your process of asking questions, like, is this okay? What is that okay? Like, how should I approach this? You know, you're going to get some genuine feedback that can kind of help you steer. And it's almost the same advice in social activism. Instead of thinking you know better than everybody, say, how can I ally myself to the self-stated wishes of this group, or whatever, and then you have a very different approach. So with that said, keep leaning in. Like, obviously, when it comes to things like music, like, I don't even think there is a culturally pure form of music out there in the modern world, right? Like, people from every race and culture are speaking to each other through music all the time. And it's, whatever, polymorphous, like it's constantly changing and from multiple sources of influence. And then, at the same time, there's some other kinds of music, maybe ceremonial music and so forth, that might be governed by somewhat different rules. And so if you just ask, like, what's going on here? And I'd say the same thing about art, and a lot of other cultural things. And I do think that there are ways of thinking and approaching things and solving problems that are unique in the indigenous experience that should pollinate the garden everyone's trying to harvest from. That we have things to share with the world. And then at the same time, there has been a lot of Halloween-y, appropriative, not always respectful, kind of stuff. And also even people with good intentions who kind of have a Jesus complex, like, I'm going to go save you without listening to you kind of things. And so, those are some of the potholes, but I think with a good heart and an open mind and sustained conversation with whoever's culture you're engaging with, you'll do fine. And keep asking and keep leaning in. It's good. It's respectful to ask. It's good.
Let's see, Trevor had another question.
Go ahead.
I wanted to get like your personal opinion on Native culture being used in sports. Like, obviously names like the R words and Chief Wahoo, those are very offensive symbols. I was wondering how you thought about things like the Chiefs and the Braves. The Seattle hockey team was like suggested to be the totems at one point.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think kind of the bottom line for me, and you may not, this is one of those topics where you get a diversity of, responses from different Native people. But I think the bottom line for me is, I think we should move in the direction of no human mascots. And there are others out there, right? Vikings, Fighting Irish, whatever. But I think moving in the direction of no human mascots is going to serve the sports and the country the best. At the very least, regardless of how you feel about, Native mascots, we'd all have to agree that at the very least, they're controversial, right? And so you're going to put controversy in the middle of the sport. And oftentimes these mascots are being used for schools and in the middle of a school. And it's going to be, in these cases, racially divisive. And especially for schools, it probably says something in their mission somewhere about inclusive learning environment, and respect and education. So why put something that is inimical to the mission at the center? And ironically, like, I do think our sports pastimes are things that transcend race and all these other divisions, and could be something that's quite unifying on a cultural level. Like, no reason why football or baseball or whatever couldn't be like so quintessentially American that it's one of those things that everybody loves and loves to participate in. And it is that for a lot of people, but it could be more effectively that for more people. And I think, honestly, a lot of people look up to our professional athletes, and it's high time we have an ethics policy, and just kind of raise the bar, not just for individual behavior, but for the institutional behavior. Now, that being said, there's a lot of change and movement right now. The Washington Redskins are discussing a new iteration of their mascot. For the Indians, they're removing Chief Wahoo as the symbol, even though they're keeping the name for the mascot. And to me, these are kind of half measures that are not really solving the problem. Like when you look at that image, does he look like me? You know, it's just caricature, right? And they are on a spectrum. I think Redskin is, you know, more people are aware that it has a rough history, you know, like there's a bounty in Minnesota, $200 for every Redskin sent to purgatory. There was a bounty for dead Indians, you know, referring to them as Redskins in Arizona. The dictionary, you know, usually offensive, considered offensive, right? Like, but it's not just that term, it's the mascots all together. Like there are two common defenses used for them. One is, well, we picked this to honor Native people because badass Spartans and Indian warriors, like it's cool. And it's because we think you're awesome, right? That's one of the defenses for the mascots. And the other is, I found a Native person who says it doesn't bother him at all. So be quiet. And I think, you know, when you look at how hometown fans, like, I don't know, maybe these guys, how hometown fans display themselves, I have to ask, like, are they really trying to honor me or Native people? Or are they just kind of playing Halloween, right?
I've also heard that with the headdresses, it's a type of like stolen valor because that's something that would be earned in battle.
Yeah, eagle feathers, you know, were something that had to be earned and one displayed for each act of, yeah, of valor, being wounded, you know, making a kill or wounding someone, things like that. And so displaying them or putting them on a Victoria's Secret bottle is kind of so removing them from their appropriate cultural context that it's like a mockery of those traditions. But remember this too, like even if the hometown fans would behave, and that's just the hugest if, the opposing fans will always defile their opponent's mascots in the name of team and school spirit. So, you know, you get the hang or kill Indians in effigy kind of stuff, and you get this kind of stuff. You know, when we have real issues with like substance abuse and violence and stuff like that, you know, chiefs will scalp the Redskins, feed them whiskey, send a reservation, hi how are ya kind of stuff. And I just don't see the honor and the respect. And even once the mascot's done away with, there's still a lot of people fighting. Like they got rid of the Fighting Sioux, you know, North Dakota, and there's still people making beer bong t-shirts with a dude in a headdress drinking beer spelled super drunk like the name of the tribe, you know. And opposing fans will always do stuff like this, like, you know, one team's named the Indians, so the opposing fans say, hey, Indians, get ready to leave in a trail of tears round to hi how are ya, and that's a high school. You know, here's another high school, same thing. You know, here's another high school, Pep Fest. You know, so you got a stagecoach with the Indian and dynamite and scalp the Indians and whatever. And so like, and this school's in Oklahoma, lots of natives in the school. Like, am I supposed to feel comfortable bringing my kids to sit next to these characters in the stands? You know, are they supposed to feel good going to that school? When we're trying to deal with bullying and microaggressions, and then that's like the whole culture of the school. And then the other thing, you know, the other defense is like, you know, I found some natives who says it doesn't bother them, and there are some. The Seminole tribe in Florida gave permission for the college team to use their name. And the Meskwaki gave permission for the hockey team to use the name of their chief, the Blackhawks. You know, and so there have been a couple sanctions, but there have been over 100 tribes that have passed resolutions that have repudiated the use of native imagery for mascots and sports teams. And the National Congress of American Indians, which represents all of the federally recognized tribes in their interactions with the US government, has passed resolutions repudiating their use. So we got to listen. Like, I don't know if you ever listen to country music, but there's a song by Gretchen Wilson that goes, I'm a redneck woman, I ain't no high class broad, right? And goes on and on. Just a product of my race, and I say, hey, y'all, and yeehaw. Does that mean I get to call every white woman I meet redneck woman? Probably not, right? Might it offend somebody? Probably so. And so it's an issue of power and decision-making. If I, as a man, tell a woman, you have no right to be offended by me calling you redneck woman, because Gretchen Wilson loves that label, I'm taking someone else's power over how they are to be addressed and considered and conveyed. And so when someone says, you have no right to be offended by redskin because so-and-so said it is fine, it's the same thing. We got to listen to those Native voices. And the Native voices, in spite of a few outliers, are pretty consistent about what they want. And frankly, if there was even just one woman who said, don't call me redneck woman, I wouldn't use that for a public presentation or anything like that, right? If there's one Native who's upset and offended, we should listen to that. Take the controversy out, take the offensive crap out, put education and inclusive learning environment at the center of the schools, put unifying culture at the center of our national sports pastime.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there other questions? I don't want to monopolize. I know you have 9 kids at home waiting for you. I don't want to monopolize your time.
And they're cooking tonight too, so I'm kind of curious what they're going to do.
Does anyone else have a question for Professor Treuer?
You feel free. You can here take a look at some of this stuff. There's stuff on historical trauma, Black Lives Matter, Native Lives Matter, all those kind of debates. What is sovereignty? Historical events, U.S. Dakota War, Andrew Jackson, education. Wherever you want to go, let me know.
I have another question that I'm not sure you really know about. It's kind of something that I guess I haven't heard about, but during this pandemic, I know a lot of minority groups have been, rightfully rightfully speaking up about the fact that they're not necessarily getting the best preventative care, the highest priority in hospitals. Have you noticed or heard of anything like that happening?
Yeah, there have been some things distinct in the Native experience around COVID. There's actually quite a bit of national press that was reporting on the outbreaks at Navajo Nation, which were especially devastating. There are a number of reasons why. For starters, a lot of the population at Navajo and a lot of other Native communities too wouldn't even have something like running water, which is kind of helpful for washing hands. Have a lot of monolingual Navajo speakers who weren't getting information, and have really big families who are crowded together in the same spaces. So when there's an outbreak, it goes do 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 do. And all of those things are making the outbreaks really tough. The tribes, because they are sovereign nations, were actually supposed to receive special allocations of funds for their health programs to do things like get the public notices put into Indigenous languages and get information driven out to rural areas and bring more potable water, and different things like that. And the Trump administration embargoed those funds for about the first 5 months of the COVID outbreak. And so it was impossible for them to fund and mobilize those things without the support. That said, tribes still leaned in and found other ways to try to get that information put together using their own money and so forth. But those things had a disproportionate impact. And then also, in the Northern Plains, in parts of the Southwest, even parts of the Great Lakes region too, you've got much more isolated populations where it's a longer drive to get to a hospital. And you have a small, Indian Health Service hospital that, especially in the early stages, didn't have ventilators, things like that. And so, it was had a disproportionate impact. I think the ventilator shortages have, for the most part, been addressed now. But the spread, especially amongst younger people, is really ongoing and impacting Native communities. I personally know a number of people who have died from COVID. mainly in the Mille Lacs Reservation in central Minnesota and Red Lake in northwestern Minnesota. So it's impacting us big time. Did I catch all of it there?
I think so.
Okay.
Anyone else, or do you have anything else you would like? This has been terrific, having a chance to hear from you directly.
Oh, sure.
I really thank you for taking the time to, spend with us, and knowing how busy you are. I don't want to keep you longer, but if you do have anything else you feel we need to know, I really do appreciate you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it, and appreciate all of you guys. Keep leaning in, keep asking questions, keep reading, keep hunting for information, keep pushing for change. It's kind of tough sometimes just slogging through school, and it's tough slogging through on Zoom all the time. Everyone gets Zoom fatigue and stuff like that. So, appreciate you guys hanging in. And in the chat window is a link to my website. There's more information, free resources. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'm happy to keep the conversation going.
Thank you very much. And so, Gigawabaman.
Ahau, Gikawabamin. Oh, wow. Prof will be praying with the Chiefs pretty soon.
That's good. Thank you very much, Anton. It was great talking to you.
Okay.
So
take care.
Take care. Bye.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so why don't we take a short break and come back in about, how about 7:30, okay? It was interesting. So thank you for your questions. Good job. And so we'll be back in about 7 minutes, okay? Well, it's good to see you all. It was very interesting. Any thoughts, follow-up questions, things you wished you had asked? Things you learned?
As you know, I joined a little late. I don't know if anyone asked about any of the current issues and what he thought of, like how to address them.
Like what current issues?
I was gonna ask something around the basis of what the most impactful historical moment was and how people that's affecting them still today and how they're addressing it.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I wish you had asked it,
No,
even if you
I
came in
didn't-
late, because no one else did. So
I didn't seem like I wasn't listening. I don't know if you saw me join late.
well, we had one student who hadn't heard the first 20 minutes and essentially asked him to repeat it. So I don't think it would have been out of line for you to ask that, because maybe he would have thought of another issue if he'd already addressed that. But yeah, well, I guess, we'll always be wondering. But that's a very good question, because there are a lot of issues and things that impact all of us. So I don't know. He did say you could follow up. He sent you his website? He posted his website, so I guess you could send him an email. And yeah, good question. Other profound questions that are going to change the way we think? Yeah, I usually think of questions afterward too. So I'm not trying to make you feel bad, Alessandro, for not being able to ask that. It's usually though, I usually ask it about a week later. And in fact, I'm still thinking of questions people asked me 20 years ago. So my mind isn't as quick as yours. So any other thoughts, observations, things you learned? Okay.
Do you know the thing he was talking about towards the beginning? It was like, I'm drawing a
With
blank.
hunting?
Yeah. Do you know how old?
Yeah, he said he said around 10, 11, 12. That's
Okay.
Yeah,
I missed that one part.
Yeah, he didn't say that. I saw you had asked that question,
Yeah.
but he did kind of say that's usually when that is. It's like this rite of passage when you make your first kill as a hunter, and then what happens. So
it's like kind of when they become an adult.
yeah, because then you're able to provide for your family once you've done that, which is the essential thing. I was really thinking about that.
I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was because then you can see as the Indians are sent to boarding schools, and that all is not what they're doing. I mean, they lose the power to provide for their families. They're provide for themselves. So we'll be talking about this more when we get into the late 19th century with the attempt to eliminate the buffalo, because they think that the Indians, if they no longer have this resource, they will be forced not to be Indians anymore. So this deprives the Indians of the ability to hunt and do what they have been doing. And instead they're supposed to raise cattle, which isn't what they had been doing. And in fact, not really raising cattle, they're given cattle by the Indian agent every year. And so they're being provided for rather than providing for themselves. So that's an interesting question, because it is an essential thing. You know, what you're doing right now is kind of a rite of passage, so you're able to provide for yourselves. Some of you may be here just for the love of learning and because you want to know more things, but I suspect most are, and you and whoever is helping you pay for this are hoping that this will allow you to provide for yourself. Which is a good thing. I'm not denigrating it, but most cultures do have something like this, and it's such a profound thing. But it's, as he was talking about, the fish not seeing the glass bowl. It's something we don't think about because it's so implicit in what we're doing. That most cultures do have some way of educating young people so that they are able to do the things they need to, and this would be it. So that, in fact, the fact that they're perpetuating this is really an interesting thing, even though, you know, he and his brother both went to Princeton and both became academics, but they're still keeping these traditions going, which is really, and not only that, but also maintaining this spiritual connection with the ancestors and with the future, which is very interesting. Other questions or observations before I get back to just talking about history? I always feel like you have a really interesting speaker, and then I'm supposed to go back to what I was going to do, and you're probably all thinking about transferring out to Minnesota now. But until that happens, I still have a responsibility and obligation to teach you stuff. So what I was going to talk about tonight, Trevor, you're raising your hand again.
Yeah, just a quick question. Did you say you were gonna like elaborate on what you were just talking about with the buffalo in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
I will, yeah. So remind me if I don't. And it's a big story. And it is, one of the things about teaching this particular class is, you're thinking about American history in a different way. And the patterns in American history, or the kind of marking points that usually historians use, you have to reevaluate. And one of the big ones you have to reevaluate is the Civil War. There are things that happened during the Civil War that are of great importance among Native Americans, and there are Native Americans who fight in the Civil War on both sides. But it's not the big event that it is in the history of the United States. But one of the big things that happens as a result of the Civil War is the winning side in the Civil War wins by waging war against the economy of the losing side. And in many ways, this is a doctrine devised of total war. Traditionally, warfare is between two armed forces, but the Civil War really becomes warfare to cripple the economy of the side that is going to lose. And after the Civil War, it is the same military officers who used that strategy against the Native people. And so people who loom large in the Civil War also loom large afterward. William Tecumseh Sherman being one of them, who probably is regarded somewhere as, somewhere in the same way that Andrew Jackson is among Native people. But another is Ulysses S. Grant, and Grant as president does change Indian policy. So Sherman and Grant have kind of different approaches to Native people after the war, but remember, Sherman remains a military officer and Grant is the president and does change Indian policy in some beneficial ways, but that's a story for another day. And we'll get back to the buffalo and what happens with the buffalo, because that becomes the next real field of conflict after the Civil War. So anyway, anticipating that, maybe I should have just stuck with that rather than going back to the 1830s and talking about the Seminole in Florida, which is what I had planned to do. Other questions or things? In some way, yes, Patrick?
I'm a bit curious. Last time we talked about the Cherokee syllabary, right?
Yeah.
I was curious if you know if any, I guess, modern Native languages use that syllabary.
Well, Cherokee does.
Okay.
And it really would only apply in Cherokee because of the sounds, but yeah, no, I don't think so.
Okay. So I was wondering, do you know if like Ojibwe would have its own syllabary, or if it just
they actually transliterated things into English.
Okay.
So yes and no. I mean, in some ways, devising a syllabary the way Sequoyah did was quite an ingenious thing. On the other hand, it does make it more difficult, because if you already know a language, now you need to learn not only the sounds, but also a different way they look. It's like going back and forth between, say, Arabic and the Latin alphabet, or Cyrillic, or Chinese or Korean or Japanese, which use their own sets of characters, which, I suppose you could. Or do, because each character in Chinese has a certain meaning, a certain sound, but the sound's different. I mean, languages are complicated things, as he was saying, as I think we're learning, and with so many different native languages, Yeah, and it's really a complicated issue. And you see this, well, another story I know about languages, not to getting away from Native people for a moment. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Kemal Ataturk, who becomes the founder of modern Turkey, realizes that he wants to modernize Turkey, and the Turkish was written using the Arabic script, but he says we should change to using the Latin alphabet to write it. And so he brings linguists together who tell him that this is a 30-year project, and he says we have 1 year to do it. So they change very quickly to transliterating things into English, and consequently there are Turkish documents and Ottoman documents tend to be in the Arabic script, but it's the Turkish language. So they're not in Arabic, but it's the language that uses the Arabic script. This is kind of really off of the subject of a very good question you asked about the Cherokee syllabary, and suddenly we're talking about Kemal Ataturk. And I'm not actually Turkish, if you're wondering, because I think if anyone here is Turkish, I'm probably going to be very offensive, and you will probably walk out. Everything comes around to Ataturk if you're Turkish, but that's anyway. I think I've said enough on that subject. And so, Jeffrey, you're probably writing to the dean right now saying he's saying bad things about Turkey. And, actually, it's a criminal offense in Turkey to insult at the memory of Ataturk. But that's, anyway, other questions? Other people that I can offend now. That's, okay, good. Well, let's move on. And the Seminole War, in which goes off and on from 1817 to 1858, very long period of warfare. And it costs the United States about $40 million over these 40 years of warfare. And ultimately, it does result in most of the Seminole being removed from what is today the state of Florida. But for every 2 Seminole who were removed, 1 American soldier died. It's really a striking cost of this war. And for, I guess, at roughly 40 years off and on, it still is the longest war in the history of the United States, and one of the least understood. Show of hands, who here is aware that there was a 40-year period of warfare in Florida involving the Seminoles in the United States? Has anyone here been to Florida, actually? Yeah. Yeah. Most of us have. And, if you look closely, you can see some markers of this. And there are still Seminoles in the state of Florida. As Manton mentioned, the Seminoles allow the University of Florida team to use their mascot. And I think they probably got paid for this. And the Seminoles are also responsible in a big way for Native people now having casinos, because the Seminoles in Florida opened one of the first casinos back in the 1970s, actually a bingo parlor in the Everglades. Gambling is illegal in Florida, but the Seminoles had a reservation, which they get after this war. I think they're given a reservation during the war, but they've held on to it. And in fact, one of the bands of the Seminole, the Miccosukee, never officially made peace with the United States. And so that's because of the Seminoles opening a gambling parlor that in 1988, the Congress passed the Indian Gaming Act, which gives Native people the power to have a casino on Indian land. So anyway, they're still there and holding on in this really difficult area. Now, of course, Florida is really conducive to people visiting, but much of it is, if you take away air conditioning, Florida would be uninhabitable for most people. And in fact, in Statuary Hall in Washington, in the Capitol building, each state is allowed to have 2 statues of people who are representative of the state. They get to choose whoever it is. And Florida is represented by two people, one of whom I'll be talking about tonight, and that is Osceola, who was a Seminole warrior. In fact, his mother was Creek. He came to Florida as a refugee after the Creek War. So he is one of the representatives of Florida. And the other is John Gorey. And Gorey is there because at about the same time, we have the Seminole Wars happening in the peninsula of Florida. Gorey in the a little port on the Gulf is inventing a machine that will cool the air. And in making this machine that cools the air, he also creates a machine that also makes ice. So he's there because he invented air conditioning. So, so you have these two pieces of Florida's story represented there. I don't know how I got into this particular story, but the word Seminole comes from a native word which means fugitive or wild men, istisimoli, or the Spanish called them cimarrones, that is runaways or fugitives. And in many cases, these are people who came from Georgia, Alabama, into this very different place. There were native people in Florida, had been native people in Florida. The Seminoles were intermarried with these native people in Florida. And remember, the Spanish had been in Florida for a long time. St. Augustine, the town, was founded in, I think, 1564. So long before Jamestown, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, and the Spanish had been there in this outpost in Florida. And in the 1680s or so, English planted a colony at South Carolina, and the Spanish are encouraging the enslaved people in South Carolina to come to Florida. And in fact, there are forts, a town set up of African Americans who had been enslaved in South Carolina who come to Florida and are part of the Spanish world. And some of them also intermarry with the native people who are there. And the Spanish bring cattle to raise here so that they'll have beef to supply Cuba and Puerto Rico and so on. And they also bring horses and other things. And in 1763, at the end of wars between the English and the Spanish and the French, the English actually get Florida and the Spanish leave. They leave behind these African Americans and they leave behind their cattle and their horses, and the cattle and the horses multiply in Florida. You know, they can eat the swamp, the sawgrass and the other things. And you know, Florida, a big swampy place. I'm sorry. I hit the wrong button. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is a typical, this is actually a drawing made in the 1840s of a town, a Seminole town in Florida. And you can see it's a clearing. You can see the structures that they would have built, fairly simple structures with a thatched roof. They're open to the elements. As you know, if you live in Florida, you know, you really don't need walls other than to keep out the insects. And often there would be a platform here or not. And so they've cleared this area for farming. And you have one of these old live oak trees that is draped in Spanish moss, very much characteristic of Florida, as of course are these palm trees. And so this, in 1763, as I said, the Spanish leave. St. Augustine is somewhere over here in this area. It's actually, and this is the St. John's River, here's St. Augustine, the St. John's River, wide river, really fed by these lakes in the north central part of Florida. And so it's, and then of course the interior, it's very, a lot of swamps, ponds, and things grow very quickly here. So 1763, the Spanish leave, and they leave behind their cattle who proliferate And this makes life somewhat easier for the native people. You remember I've talked a little bit, or I should have, about the cattle and the impact they have in other places, but the big difference here is the cattle are just left, and the Spanish don't stay and say, don't bother our cattle, which is what happens in the English colonies. The English bring cattle, stay, and of course don't want the Indians to kill their cattle, but here the Spanish have left the cattle behind, so they're there for the Indians. And we can see a couple of things happening here. Well, one is, of course, as I said, the English get Florida in 1763 and hold on to it until 1783, another war that involves the English and the French and the Spanish. And at the end of this war in 1783, the Spanish get Florida back. The Spanish really aren't that interested in Florida because the climate itself is so difficult. And what you see happening with the expansion of Georgia, which we've talked about with the expulsion of the Cherokee and the Creek, this area is really fertile. And in fact, these rivers are essential to the Americans, because if you have a cotton plantation here in Georgia, the way to get your cotton to market is along these rivers. And so the Jefferson administration in 1801 wants to acquire Florida. And by Florida, they really meant, this is the Chattahoochee River, and they really meant this area from the Chattahoochee west to the eastern bank of the Mississippi. In fact, if you've been to Louisiana, you probably know that the parishes, which are what they call the counties in Louisiana, east of the Mississippi, and are called the Florida parishes, because that was part of West Florida. All of this here is East Florida, and most of the interior is pretty worthless. But these rivers are vital for getting goods to market, which is what's going to bring an American interest in this territory. The Jefferson administration fails to purchase Florida in 1801. Instead, it gets Louisiana, which is a different story. But then after the War of 1812, the United States is going to acquire Florida. And it's kind of a messy story about this. You can kind of tell when this was acquired by the names of the counties here. Madison, Jefferson, Leon, Duval are both Florida characters. Here is Jackson, and of course, the big city in Florida at this time is Jacksonville. Andrew Jackson is the first governor of Florida after the American acquisition of it. So let's go back to how all of this happens, because it's kind of an interesting story. Now, the Seminole, that is, well, let me back up. The Seminole, many of them had run away from Georgia and other places among the Cherokee, the Creek, and had come here where they're under fewer restrictions and so on. And they live along these rivers. And they also have slaves, that is African-American slaves, people who have run away from slavery further north, or people descended from the black folks who were living in and around St. Augustine and in this area. But being the enslaved people do agricultural work here, and they pay tribute to the Seminole, who are ostensibly in control, and this is a way of getting the Seminole to protect them. They are producing crops here and then providing the Seminole with tribute in the form of things they produce, crops and so on. And they are also, like the Seminole, hunting and fishing and developing raising their own livestock, cultivating their own fields. So you have this really fascinating world developing here in an area of a kind of terrain that no one else really wants. The terrain that other Americans particularly want is up here along the Florida Panhandle and what's West Florida and so on, because there the land is very much like the land in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Here it is swampy, very bad for agriculture. You can graze cattle here. And so it's kind of a world being left alone. You know, there's some outposts along the coast, but there hasn't been a whole lot of movement into the interior. And for most of the year, it's very hot, swampy, a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of insects. This area to the north is good farming land. So this area is developing in the north, it's developing cotton agriculture, and this area to the south, the peninsula, is not. Someone wrote in the 1830s about, you know, comparing life among the Seminole and the enslaved people in Florida to life in the American states. And he says that the Seminole Indians are very poor agriculturalists and husbandmen. That is, they're not really good farmers. And without their Negroes, they would literally starve. The Black people's life among the Indians, compared with that of Negroes under white overseers, is one of luxury and ease, with the demands upon him trifling, scarcely ever exceeding 8 or 10 bushels from the crop, the remainder being applied to his own profit. So the Seminoles did have slaves, and these people mainly lived in their own communities, produced crops, and then they would give a share of this to the Seminoles, and the Seminole men then hunted and fished and did what they always had done. And because these enslaved people also had a lot of spare time, I mean, as long as they're providing a few bushels of their crops every year to their the Seminole leaders, everything is good. They also spend their time hunting and fishing. They live separate, often remote from their owners, and enjoy an equal share of liberty. Very different from life on a cotton plantation for an enslaved person. You know, don't have an overseer telling you what to do and whipping you if you don't. So much different, which is something that makes it very attractive for the enslaved people up here. Well, why don't we just run off and live among the Seminole? And this had been happening for quite a while. And so we do have a lot of Black villages in the interior of Florida. And some of the Black folks here become actually quite influential. This is a man named Abraham. And Abraham at one time had been owned by Micanopy, who was he was one of the leaders of the Seminole. You know, like other native groups, they have chiefs, and they also have war chiefs, and they also have religious chiefs. Micanopy is the high chief, but that doesn't mean he gets to order people around. It means he lives in a village, and people in other villages look to him for counsel if they need counsel about something. And his position is partly heredity. That is, his mother had been in the ruling clan, and so he is as well. And he's born about 1780, so he's born after the American Revolution. And by the time of the story I'm going to tell he's already an adult. And then Abraham had been a slave of his, but Abraham is gifted with languages. So Abraham is good as an interpreter between the Americans, the Seminole, the Spanish. He's good with languages. And also, so he had been enslaved, but by the time early 19th century, he is free. And he's also become something of a leader among the Seminole. And he speaks English, Spanish, other Indian languages. And he's really going to become one of the driving forces in the Seminole resistance they'll be talking about. And then there are others like him. There's John Cesar, who was enslaved by a man named Imathala. And Imathala is the chief of the Miccosukee who live here along the St. Johns River. This is the St. Johns, and the Miccosukee are here. And Cesar and Abraham have a strategy. As the Americans are coming south and putting up plantations along the St. Johns River, and parts of it are arable, they entice the enslaved people there to run off and join them. This begins happening, and actually, when the war is going to break out, about 250 of the enslaved people here along the St. Johns River revolt, and they start burning. They burn their plantations, and they go south to join the Seminoles. And Cesar leads a guerrilla campaign in the area of St. Augustine, which by this time is an American outpost on the coast of Florida. So something that these native people and formerly enslaved people, who now are pretty much indigenous to the area, have, is a good sense of this territory and an ability to move around in this territory. You know, logistically, a war fought here against an indigenous people is going to be very difficult for anyone who isn't already familiar with this territory. Another of these leaders is, let me see if I have a picture of, John Horse. Actually, he's, Caballo was his, another of his Spanish name. You see Spanish, English, go back and forth here. Caballo, of course, and horse mean the same thing. And he becomes a Black sub-chief, just as Abraham is kind of a sub-chief to Micanopy. He becomes a sub-chief to Wildcat, who is another of the Seminole war leaders. Great name for a war leader. And there are interrelationships among these people who come from different bands of the Cherokee. So for example, Imathla's son is married to Micanopy's daughter or sister. So you have these intermarriages, interrelationships among these various players in this. Now, going back to 1815 for a moment, along the Apalachicola River, which is, if I am not mistaken, somewhere in this area. I apologize. Yeah, here it is. There was a Negro fort that is a fort maintained. This is before all of this becomes American territory. So ignore the names of these counties here. 60 miles south of the Georgia border and 15 miles from the coast, there is this fort maintained by Black people, which is why it is called the Negro Fort. And when the British controlled this area after the Revolution, and in 1815, they had given it back to the Spanish, but they have a fort here. The British have a base at Pensacola from which they had been arming the Creek during the Creek War, and the arming other native people against the Americans who are coming south. And there are about 800 Blacks living around the Negro Fort, mainly people who had run away from slavery in Georgia. So you have this fortified place here in Florida, and a fort maintained by these African Americans who are holding it in an area that technically it was Spanish, but the British also were setting up camp along the coast. And actually, then it would have been along this river. Here's Apalachicola. I apologize for getting that so horribly wrong. And Andrew Jackson, who is the general in charge of the Southern Army and remember the hero of New Orleans in 1815, in 1816, he sends a force up the river, which succeeds in blowing up the fort. They send a hot shot into the fort, and that blows up 700 barrels of gunpowder, and 270 people are killed instantly in this devastating explosion of the Negro Fort. As Jackson is essentially invading Florida, and his reason for invading Florida is because of the enslaved people running away from Georgia and coming here and allying with the native people here, who are also being accused of making raids into Georgia and having supported the Creeks. Most of them actually had opposed the Creeks. One of the reasons they came here was to get away from the Creek War, which happened between 1811 and 1814 or so. There's also kind of a mysterious episode, if you're interested in one of these mysterious, little-known episodes in American history, something called the Patriots' War, that breaks out just about the same time as the War of 1812 over this contested border between Georgia and Florida. Okay. This is the beginning of what we call the First Seminole War. There are periods of fighting and periods of peace, and this is one of the periods of fighting that really is precipitated by Andrew Jackson. And I am getting the sense that Jackson's not going to be a hero to many of us. Anyway, Jackson sends a force under General Edmund Gaines, and I think I have a picture of General Gaines here. Yeah, this is, okay, this is the Panhandle. This is General Gaines. He sends him into Florida in order to arrest Imathla, that native thinking that Imathla, knowing that Imathla actually is encouraging these enslaved people to run away from Georgia and staging raids across the border. So you have Jackson sending General Gaines here to do something about what he sees as this problem. Imathla is giving refuge to fugitives from slavery. And the first battle happens, or just in about November the 21st of 1817 in this. And Gaines burns one of the towns. Imathla burns one of the towns just north of the border. If you want to know a way to provoke Andrew Jackson or anyone, slip across the border and burn a town, which is what Imathla does. And Imathla then retreats into Florida, and 9 days later, Jackson has sent a boat to, sorry, I'm trying to find that map again. Jackson sends a boat to Fort Scott on the Apalachicola River, and Imathla attacks the boat, killing 40 soldiers. Killing 6 of the soldiers. I'm sorry, I'll get the number right eventually. 34 soldiers, or 34 people on the boat, including 7 wives of soldiers and 4 children. Okay, so this boat going to Fort Scott, carrying soldiers, is attacked. Everyone on board except for 6 people are killed. This is going to lead Jackson then to invade Florida with 3,500 men. 500 of them are regulars and 200 are Cherokee warriors. Also 1,000 Tennessee volunteers. And they march down into Florida to the Suwannee River. And there they attack the village of a man named Billy Bowlegs. This is Billy Bowlegs. And Abraham is also here along the Suwannee. And as Jackson is coming down to the Suwannee, these guys go and attack St. Mark's, a British outpost here on the coast of Florida. This is after most of the British had left. And then Jackson marches west to Pensacola, and then Rudy executes 2 British subjects. And this is quite a chaotic war, and I think my telling of it isn't making it any more comprehensible to you. Now, among the Seminole refugees here was this man, Osceola. He was a Creek refugee, had come here with his mother, and actually his name at this time was Billy Powell. He becomes Usa Yaholo, and that's of course transliterated into Osceola. Usa or Usa Yaholo, and this means roughly the black drink singer. The black drink is really a potent drink that at ceremonies the Seminoles will drink, and typically it makes you very sick, but he drinks it and he sings. That is, this is really showing his power, his ability to overcome something, and it's a great feat. And this is something that is going to make him into, it's a sign of his character. And one of the things we're always looking for are signs of character, which he is always demonstrating. And they had come from Alabama and actually had migrated with one of the Creek prophets, a guy named Peter McQueen. And they make their way into the area around Alachua on the west coast of Florida. And it's not clear what role he is going to take in what happens, because at about the same time, Jackson's invaded Florida. And in between 1819 and 1821, the United States negotiates a treaty with Spain by which the United States acquires Florida. And one of the early governors of Florida, Jackson had been the military governor, is this man, Gabriel Duval. And Osceola becomes a scout for Governor Duval. This initial war had ended, and Spain is out, the Americans are in, and Osceola and others are working with some of these Americans, and Osceola is a scout for Duval. He becomes very close to one of the lieutenants serving under Duval. In fact, they become inseparable, a lieutenant who actually was a graduate of West Point. So Osceola initially is very much part of this new world moving in. He becomes more militant as more Americans are moving into the area. As I said, Florida is acquired by the United States in 1821. And then in 1823, the United States makes a treaty with the Seminole, the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. And by this treaty, the Seminole are supposed to stay roughly in the area between the Charlotte River and Ocala. So roughly this area here is reserved to the Seminole, and they're not to be closer than 20 miles from the coast. The Americans want to keep them out of communicating with the Spanish in Cuba, which is the reason they don't want the Seminole living along the coast. And this treaty is going to last for 20 years. Now, this does encompass much of the area the Seminole already are living in, and so it doesn't seem like that bad a deal for the Seminole initially, and of course 20 years is a long time. Now, Jackson isn't really happy with this treaty because he doesn't see why we don't remove the Seminole entirely. And when he becomes president in 1829, that's what he wants to do. In fact, he wants to remove the Indians and sell the black people here who are living in this area in central Florida. And he wants to sell the land, and he really doesn't want to have these black communities here in Florida that will act as a magnet to enslaved people in Georgia and Alabama. So this is really the impetus for this war that is going to begin again in the 1830s. In March of 1835, another American general named Wiley Thompson calls for a conference or a council of all of the chiefs at Fort King. Now, Micanopy is like the head chief, but then there are lots of other chiefs of different bands. One of the things that makes it difficult for both the Indians and the Americans to negotiate is because there are all of these different lines of authority. And so they call a council for all of the chiefs at Fort King. And Fort King is I believe on the St. Johns River. Yeah, here it is. So this is the St. Johns River that flows down or flows up here. And this is Fort Brooke, now Tampa. So you can see this is kind of in the middle of things. Go back to this map. So somewhere in this area is Fort King. And at this council, Thompson reads to them a letter from President Jackson, essentially telling them he wants to get them out of this area. And Abraham then translates this. There are about 150 chiefs and warriors at this council. And one of the leaders of the Seminole says, can we have 30 days to consider this? And that way we'll be able to assemble all the representatives of the whole nation here. So in April, about 1,500 Seminoles gather at Fort King. And again, they have the letter read to them, and there's an American military force there. And under duress, the next day, 16 of their chiefs sign a paper acknowledging that the Treaty of Payne's Landing, as we'll call it, is valid. The Treaty of Payne's Landing is the one that says, okay, we're all going to leave. What Jackson wanted was to get them all out of Florida. And so we say, okay, that treaty is valid. We are all going to leave. 5 of the others don't sign. And the ones who don't sign, including Micanopy, Jumper, Sam Jones, or Thompson strikes them from the list of chiefs and says they're no longer, Micanopy no longer their head chief. And then another American officer says he's going to drive, if the Seminoles won't go any other way, we'll drive them out by military force. So this is what you see among the Seminoles at this time. You have some of them saying, okay, we'll agree, we'll leave. Others are saying, no, we're not going to leave. And the Americans are saying everybody has to go. Plus, one of the sticking points for the Seminole is this. The Americans want them to give up the black people. The black Seminoles aren't part of this. They're going to be sold into slavery and no longer form these communities here. So some of the Seminole are saying, okay, we can live with that. Others are saying, no, we can't live with that. Very complicated story here in the middle of the 1830s. Remember, this is at the same time as the United States is negotiating the treaties with the Cherokee and the Creek and the others to have them move west to the Mississippi. And in some ways, the Cherokee Treaty is much the same, and in other ways, it's different. Now, at this, when Duncan Clinch says we're going to drive you all out, everyone has to sign the treaty agreeing to their removal. Now, according to the legend, Osceola, who is one of the chiefs here, even though he's relatively young, takes his knife, and they're all supposed to come and put their mark on the treaty. He sticks his knife through the treaty and says, this is the only way I will sign this treaty. It's kind of a bold statement. He pins the treaty to the table with his knife. General Thompson realizes that's kind of a warlike thing, even though it seems like most of the Seminole chiefs are going along. These others aren't. That could be trouble. He bans the sale of ammunition and other supplies to the Seminole, and the Seminole take that actually as a declaration of war. Now, Thompson, the general in charge of all of this, has Osceola arrested. In fact, I have one of the great things about this story is you had to have a lot of images for it. Here is the arrest of Osceola, and Osceola is arrested and he's in jail, and he asks one of the chiefs who is in favor of everyone leaving to help him get released, which the guy does. And Osceola then meets with the other chiefs, and they agree that any chief or warrior who agrees to being moved west should be regarded as should be deemed an enemy and put to death. So you have this split emerging among the Seminole between those like Osceola who say we're going to stay, and others are saying, yeah, we might as well go. Imathala is one of the guys who has agreed that we'll leave, and in fact, Imathala and his allies have sold their cattle and are preparing to go west. And Osceola and his allies, as Imathala and his people are on their way to Fort Brooke, which is now Tampa, where they're going to be deported, Osceola and his group attack them. And they shoot Imathala. They take the money that he's gotten for his cattle, and they don't keep it. They throw it. They scatter it in all directions. And they forbid any of their followers to touch it. No one can touch this money. And then Osceola and his followers disappear into the swamps. Now, General Thompson hears about the death of Imathala, the Indian ally who had agreed to be deported. And so he wants to reinforce Fort King. let's see. So this is Fort Brooke, which is now the city of Tampa, and which is down here. Fort King is up here, and you can see Fort King, end of a long supply line along the St. John's, and this whole area in the between is the area of the Seminole. So Thompson realizes we need to reinforce Fort King. So he sends 100 enlisted men and 7 officers led by a Major Francis Dade on an expedition to the relief of Fort King, marching up this way to the fort from Fort Brooke. 4 oxen, a wagon being pulled by the 4 oxen holds a 6-pound gun and 50 bayonets, and they leave Tampa on the 23rd of December of 1835. It's 100 miles to Fort King. And they discover it's really tough terrain to get a cannon through. The cannon keeps floundering in the mud. So they have to send back to Fort Brooke for horses to get this out. And all the while, as you can imagine, as they're making this trek, the Indians are watching them. And it takes Dade and his guys 2 days to cross this river, which isn't a good thing if you're being watched by an enemy who's waiting for the proper opportunity to attack. And on the 28th of December, they're about 5 miles east of this swamp when they are, in fact, Dade gets to higher ground at this time. I mean, they've been going through lower ground. Now they're on higher ground. This seems to be a safer area. And it turns out not to be so much. The soldiers, actually, a lot of things go wrong in this disastrous expedition of Lieutenant Dade. Dade and his soldiers, it was a chilly morning in late December, and they had their coats buttoned over their ammunition belts, and which means that if you have to get your ammunition belt in a hurry, you're not going to be able to. Okay, but they're not expecting anyone to attack them. They have an advance party, a rear guard, and they're moving through these pine woods. The central part of Florida has these, pine woods, and on one side there's really tall grass, and on the other side there's a pond. And about 9 a.m., suddenly they're attacked, and the attack kills nearly every officer. And the main body of soldiers is able to get their 6-pound cannon into use. They fire 5 or 6 rounds at this enemy they can't see, but they know they're somewhere in this tall grass. And the Indians actually pick these guys off one by one from their relatively safe place. What happens, you fire the gun, there's a cloud of smoke. The smoke clears away, and then the enemy has a clear shot at you. The soldiers are shouting and whooping, which is something you do when you're in a fight like this. There's one brave who shakes his sword. The soldiers fire at him, but nothing happens. And by 4 o'clock, no soldiers left standing. And the Indians approach this breastwork that these men have very hurriedly put up. They search the bodies, they remove their weapons, they drag the cannon to the pond and throw it in. And this is really a devastating defeat for these guys. And after this, Abraham and 50 mounted black warriors draw up, and they strip the men of all of their valuables. Now, 3 of the soldiers actually were still alive, and one of them had hidden in the pond until it was dark. And 2 of them make their way back to Fort Brooke. Now, while this is happening here in this swamp, here you see it's labeled the Dade Massacre. Up at Fort King, Osceola and 80 of his warriors have ambushed Thompson, the general who would set all of this in motion, along with the lieutenant, kill both men, scalp both men. Then they kill a storekeeper, they loot a store, and then they go to meet other Indians in the swamps. So this is what's going on in the central part of Florida here in 1835, early 1836. Jackson wants to remove the Seminole the same way the United States has removed the Cherokee, the Creek, and so on. The Seminole, though, are going to resist this. And unfortunately, you're going to have to wait until next week to find out how all of this comes out. I'm prepared to stay here and keep talking, but I know all of you have lives to get back to. And so come back next week and we'll find out what happens in the Seminole War. Okay? Any last minute questions, thoughts? Okay. Well, I will see you all next week. I see
Thank
Savannah is
you.
yawning, happy that this is over, and take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too, take care.